what first got you into music? What inspired you to become a musician?
I think probably the first thing before the music entered the picture was my first intro into rock bands was finding Kiss when I was like a real little kid. So I found my dad's Kiss trading cards, and as a real little kid, I was always into like Batman and Spawn and like dark superheroes and stuff. So when I found like Gene Simmons, I thought, okay, this guy's like another comic book character. Yeah. So I was probably like 4 years old, 3 years old, and I didn't really know anything about rock and roll. My only experience with music at the time, like any 4-year-old kid, is whatever your mom's playing in the car and you're riding in the back seat and you sing along to Seal or whatever the hell was on the radio in the early '90s. Yeah. So I found that, and it just became like my everything. So I got obsessed with Kiss, and then by the time I was maybe 10 years old, I started finding stuff that was more heavy, I guess. I started getting into more punk rock stuff, so like the Misfits and the Damned, and I was like an 11-year-old kid that was obsessed with all this like old horror punk and everything. And it all fed into my initial interest, which was kind of theatrical stuff, being a big fan of comic books and that visual medium. And I think the initial bands I got into were bands that had a very theatrical approach to what they did, even if it wasn't a visual approach. Musically, like bands like Dropkick Murphys, it's a very theatrical production. There's a million people on stage, and so that's sort of how I first got into music. And then I found bands like Alkaline Trio and some of the bands that were more lyrically based, and that's when I started writing stuff. Probably around the same age most people write, 12, 13. I started doodling shitty songs about whatever first girlfriend I had. It kind of just went from there.
Okay. Now, do you feel like that time in music is kind of a bygone era at this point, or do you feel like that kind of music is still around? It's music that you were inspired by?
I think it's not necessarily even musically, because there are a billion bands that play that kind of music or whatever, or there's a billion bands that play every kind of music, but I think it's about public interest. It goes in and out, and it's obviously it's at a time right now where rock and roll is not the most prevalent genre in music, and I'm happy to say that I think that it's coming back in a big way, and I think tours like this have been responsible for the last 19 years in giving kids a rock and roll thing that's right in their hometown. In a place like Scranton, Pennsylvania, here we are, and there's everybody's these kids who come here, all your favorite bands are here today, and it's really cool, and that's why I like being part of the Warped Tour. But I think that ultimately rock music is something that it's innate in everybody, whether they necessarily want to love a rock band or not. The attitude of being rebellious and going against convention and sort of having fun and being free is something that everybody experiences. So I think at some point everybody in their life can connect to a rock and roll song, and not everybody can connect to some bubblegum pop song, or everybody can connect to whatever rap song or whatever. Nothing against other genres, it's just I think that rock and roll always holds that real salt of the earth kind of base level thing where people really do connect. And I also think that it's fun, it's a big part of people's lives. The level of dedication people have, particularly to like heavy metal music and punk rock music, there's really nothing like it. There's no level of community that you find anywhere else.
Now, what was your first Warped Tour like? I know you guys have done this tour previously. What was your first
on tour, or the first time I was here as a fan?
I guess both.
First time I came as a fan was I think 2001 or 2000. Yeah, probably 2001. I saw AFI and Rancid and Dropkick Murphys, which were three of my favorite bands at the time, and they were all on the same stage in succession. So I didn't move the whole day. I just stood and watched all my favorite bands play, and that was awesome. And I remember, like a lot of kids say here, they'll get done at the end of the day and I'll see somebody and they'll be like, oh, I can't wait till next year. I was that same way when I was a little kid. I'd go to bed and be like, oh, can't wait for next year's Warped Tour, because it's that one day where it's like, it's hugely important for particularly the adolescent. It's a very formative thing. First time we played it started in a weird circumstance. I broke my ribs about a week, about 3 days before we were supposed to start Warped Tour. And so my 9, 10, and 11 ribs I smashed. I jumped off. I shouldn't say I fell off. I ungracefully jumped off a giant marble pillar on stage and crashed down with the dumbest thing I've ever done, and fell right into this other pillar and just smashed up all my bones. So I had to miss the first week, and then I came out here and I was in a rib brace and could barely move. So that was an interesting way to start it, but it was a lot of fun. I love Warped Tour, man. I really do. It's grueling and it's rough in terms of the heat, but it's the coolest thing you can do. And I think a lot of bands feel the same way. I think some bands sometimes take it for granted just because of, it's the heat, it's hard, whatever, but you're lucky as hell if you get to be on this, because it's a real staple in the rock community. And nearly 20 years of doing this, it's doing something right. You know, Kevin knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Do you have any survival tips for maybe new bands that are coming onto the tour or that want to be on Warped Tour?
Man, I'll tell you what, I give it up to the bands that are in vans and RVs and stuff. We're fortunate that we only did Warped Tour after we got to a certain point in our career, to where we were, you know, at least on a stage and had a bus and everything. And these bands that tour around with a tour and play in the parking lot or play on the small stages or whatever, like, there's a lot of balls there, and it takes a lot, and I really give it up to them, you know. So maybe I'm not the right guy for survival tips, because I'm fortunate that, you know, my career's, because of the fans, have been giving me a chance to have a career where I can be in a nice bus and, you know, enjoy the air conditioning and the TV and all that stuff, and you know, and I thank them for that. But yeah, I would say it's a better question for someone who's, you know, really out here roughing it, because there really are a lot of bands that maybe don't get paid attention to every day, that are giving it their all every day. And there's some bands here that are fucking cooking meals for the bands, and, you know, just like stuff that's just really cool and shows just how the level of dedication that people have to wanting to be in a band and wanting to play for people.
It seems like you guys, you know, just came out of nowhere a few years ago and hit it pretty big and found the right audience. What do you attribute that to? And you just won a couple of Revolver awards and things like that. So yeah, it seems like there's an audience that really wants to hear what you guys are doing.
We're very fortunate in that sense. I mean, we've been touring for half a decade. I don't think a lot of people know that. You know, we spent a lot of time in bars and VFW halls. We toured in cars and stole U-Haul trailers because we couldn't afford, you know, vans and trailers. And, you know, played to nobody except the other bands on the bill, and had to leave venues early because we weren't going to get paid or getting into bar fights and all the stuff that all these bands experience. But it's interesting because on a public perception level, people only know your band when they know your band. So if your band comes out of nowhere and becomes a popular band, then that's sort of when people see, oh, this band had a meteoric rise out of nothing. But every band here, I mean, with the exception of some, I met a few that just kind of like a label signed them and then here you go. But by the time we ever got to do Warped Tour, we've been touring for quite a while. So we're very fortunate, and I don't know if there's one thing I could attribute the success to. I think it's just a real connection that we have with our fans, and obviously people, it's well documented that our fan base is very dedicated, and I think that's a mutually beneficial thing. We're dedicated to our audience, and we've always wanted to build a community for our fans so that they felt like there was something substantial behind them, and I think we got something cool going.
Now, you obviously have to work with a much smaller set, so how do you kind of pack in your whole show in you know, 25, 30 minutes?
Everything is different for us on Warped Tour. I mean, even like stuff like staging. You know, we're used to being a band that's very theatrical and has a lot of stuff. Right. We're the only band, I think, on Warped Tour, or maybe ever on Warped Tour, to have big CO2 cannons on stage. But, you know, we've got our stacks and all the stuff. And we try to put, at least for the Warped Tour stage, as much of a Black Veil Bride's kind of, you know, over-the-top rock and roll show as we can on what is essentially a truck, you know. But that's the nature of Warped Tour, and I love it. I love the opportunity to watch your stage roll away at the end of the night, you know, like that in the morning. But in terms of set lists, we decided to err on the side of doing a lot more new songs on this thing. I think we're only doing one song that's not off the new album. We're doing two songs, one new song, like brand new, that wasn't on the previous album, and then one song from our Set the World on Fire record. All the other songs are brand new songs. And I think that was a conscious decision that we made because we're so proud of that record, and it obviously is a concept record, and we wanted to give our fans the opportunity to hear a lot of those songs live, and maybe they wouldn't, you know, in a different circumstance.
Now, was the writing process different for that album, considering it's a larger concept and it tells a story? Was it different from writing, you know, just a regular record with a bunch of different songs?
Certainly. But I think, you know, that sort of comes with the territory of writing something that has a story that runs throughout. But I think more than anything, not even necessarily the story, the writing process for how we wrote the songs in general was different. We tried to really go back to basics and strip things down and write songs that could be played on an acoustic guitar or a piano and still be good songs. You know, not worrying about, is this the shreddiest song possible, or is this the, you know, fastest drums? It was about, you know, is this melody good enough? And if it isn't, you know, chuck it out. We had a rule that if something didn't hit in a day, it was gone. You know, and we, you know, we did something like, you know, 25 songs for the record. You know, when we put 19 tracks on the album. And, you know, anything else, we had a million ideas, it would just kind of go away. And maybe one day we'll revisit it, but the whole thing was if something didn't come together right away, it wasn't going to be good enough for the album. So with that kind of rule, I guess, over us, we tended to work harder to make really great songs.
What do you hope that listeners take away from it once they hear the entire album in full?
I think with anything, a band or musicians, we want for the listener to maybe hear the work that you put into it, not just the physical labor of writing a song, but the emotional labor and the feelings that you have and what you're trying to convey, and try to get people to feel something. And I think that's all everybody wants to really do. Some bands here want people to feel the emotion of anger or rage, or some bands want everybody to feel love or sorrow. With us, we've always been of the opinion that our songs should be about like personal strength, and there's nothing wrong with different songwriting styles. I'm not bashing a band that is all about angst, because I think that's a huge part of what rock and roll is. But with us, I tend to write more about rising out of shit that you're dealing with and how you can find personal strength, because that's something that I always really was important to me as a kid, because I grew up in an area where I wasn't particularly accepted, and I got in a lot of fights, and it was always like finding a way to get out of the kind of muck of ignorance.
Do you feel like the band is still kind of fighting that fight today?
Sometimes. I mean, look, I can't really go up there and be like, oh, woe is me, the people don't like me, because the fact is, no matter what you do, any art form, people are not going to like what you do. I'm lucky in the sense that an overwhelming amount of people, particularly on this Warped Tour, we've noticed are really into what we do. And I'm not interested in spending my whole life bitching about, how people don't like me. By the same token, if someone does mouth off to me or show me their hatred in a way that is socially rude or unacceptable to me, I will give it right back to them. But I'm not seeking it out. I'm not going to walk through Warped Tour and go, hey, why aren't you wearing my shirt or some craziness,
Yeah.
The one thing I'll never get is like the mindset or the rationale behind, like, and this happens to every band I see on the tour. There's some fucking dude who wants to like stand, you go to the Spotify stage. I'm not a fan of dubstep music. I understand its merits. I don't particularly listen to it, but there's a lot of great people that are on that stage, and I always walk by and I'll see people just, fucking flipping people off, and I'm like, dude, there's 102 bands here. There's nothing that says you have to go stand there and be a dick to that artist on stage. You know what I do? I just don't go over there. And my day is fine. I don't go be a dick to some artist that's giving their all, because there are people that really do want to hear it there, so why ruin their time?
Sure. Now, there was you also did a film that kind of ties in with that. What was the process for that like? Was that did you write it all together, or did it come kind of after the album was finished, or where did the idea for a film come about?
It came in a very simple way of like, we made the concept record and we were like, why don't we make a movie about this? And that was like, okay, well now fuck, how do we make a movie about, but we don't know anything about filmmaking, so in terms of any kind of budget, we had to scrape together a budget. We did everything on our own. The label was fortunately we had the label get behind us, and it wasn't, I don't want anybody to think it was some big budget production. We really did work our asses off to get the pieces together, and we pulled a lot of favors, and I'm really proud of what we came up with.
And what's next for you guys after Warped Tour? Where are you going from here?
We're doing a tour with Bullet for My Valentine, co-headline tour in the States, and then we're going to go back to Europe and finish the year there, and then probably start writing and maybe work on another record coming into 2014.
Do you have any kind of future goals for the band that you guys feel like you haven't accomplished yet that you'd like to?
Honestly, I don't like to set long-term or short-term goals. Sorry, I try to set long-term goals, which is, that I want to be able to play music for my whole life, and fortunately, or if I'm lucky enough to have people want to listen to it, that would be great. But in terms of like, I want to reach this or whatever, I'm just always searching for the brass ring, and I want to be the biggest band we can be and have as much fun as we can. If it all crashes and burns tomorrow, at least I got to do this, So I don't take anything for granted. I know that audiences and stuff are fickle, and I understand that sometimes things change, but I feel like I'm on top of the world right now. I have an audience that likes what we do, and I want to keep doing it. I want to keep giving them music, so hopefully I can keep doing this for the rest of my life.